Welcome, YouTube. Please gently tap the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Our third base preview is up next. Third base. Is it really as bad as everybody says it is?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think so. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Wednesday, February 16th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Oh yeah, third base breakdown today. You could just hear the excitement in my voice. Strategy, ADP review, sleepers, breakouts, busts, and more. Hello, Christopher. We'll start with you. We go from maybe the best position on yesterday's podcast in shortstop to one of the worst. What is your strategy at third base? Do you place more of a priority on this position early on in your drafts?
Not really, because there are a couple of guys in the 90 to 100 range. There are three in particular who I'm pretty likely to draft if they're at an advantageous spot. And if not, I have waited to fill my third base spot with, Justin Turner was a starter in one league. I think I went with Justin Turner and Eduardo Escobar in the 19th and 22nd rounds or something in a draft we did not that long ago. So no, I don't necessarily love the prices for a lot of the second tier or third tier third baseman. So unless I get Jose Ramirez or maybe Rafael Devers, I'm more likely to wait on the position.
Yeah, I think that you're kind of at the mercy of the draft, right? So if you have if you have a mid or late second round pick, then sure, you can wind up with a Rafael Devers or Manny Machado. But if you pass on those guys, chances are they're probably not going to be there in the third round. So you have to make that decision. Obviously, if you want Jose Ramirez, you have to be lucky enough to have a top 5 or 6 pick. And then, of course, you could draft him as well. But really, it just comes down to your draft positioning. Or, of course, if you play in a salary cap draft, auction draft, you can just bid on whatever third baseman you want. And I'd love to get one of the top 3 guys, as you will learn throughout the course of this entire podcast. Scotty, I personally view Alex Bregman, Kris Bryant, and Anthony Rendon as the end of the last tier that I realistically want at this position. How important is it that you get one of those top 9-ish third basemen this upcoming season?
Well, I see those 3 more as fallbacks because they don't feel as secure as the 6 who come ahead of them. I really draw... I guess there are separate cutoffs, obviously, right? But the big cutoff for me is actually at 6, which ends with Nolan Arenado. And unlike Chris, I am playing the position scarcity game at third base, unlike I have in maybe a decade. I'm thinking back to the glory years of Troy Tulowitzki and Hanley Ramirez when shortstop was always such a pitiful position in fantasy. Things have changed a lot, obviously, since then. But that was kind of the inspiration for the tiers approach in the first place. Was just the positions used to be so uneven, and the juice ball era, the fly ball revolution, it kind of evened them up in more recent years, so that you didn't really have to approach things that way anymore. I don't know how much of it has to do with the ball change. Just a couple years ago, third base was this amazingly deep position, and I think a lot of factors have led to it being turned on its head in the span of only 2 years. But one of it is the ball, and I probably am willing to take any of Austin Riley, Nolan Arenado, maybe Rafael Devers around earlier than maybe the pure numbers, all positions being even, would suggest you should. Because anytime I haven't, and I've been forced to make do with whatever's left at the position, things go very badly. Things go very badly for me. Because even with Alex Bregman and Anthony Rendon, and Kris Bryant, sure, it's still earlier than you'd like it to be. You can't get a bargain at third base. It's not available to you. So it's just, are you willing to pay up for numbers you're confident in, or are you going to pay up for numbers you're not confident in? And that's kind of what it boils down to for me.
Yeah, truly, you want one of the top three at the position. I think that we would probably say that about any position, but more so third base than any other one. If you can get your hands on a Jose Ramirez, a Rafael Devers, or Manny Machado, it's something that I would love to do this upcoming season.
Even Jose Ramirez, I end up moving ahead of some of the other first rounders because he's third base, because that's what he plays.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. We'll start with Jose Ramirez, of course. We'll talk about specifically those top 9 third basemen that I referenced, all of whom are going inside the top 100 picks, according to Fantasy Pros average draft position. And we start with J-Ram, Jose Ramirez. The ADP is 4.5. He's going in the middle of the first round. He is 29 years old, still in his prime. He had that blip from the end of 2018 to the first half of 2019. But outside of that, the guy has been money. Last year, 266 batting average, 36 homers, 111 runs scored, 103 RBI, 27 steals. His 134 steals since the start of 2016 are the 7th most in baseball. That is something that makes him so valuable as well in roto category leagues. Not just getting the steals, getting out of position steals, and getting an abundance of them as well when it comes to Jose Ramirez. And he's great in points leagues too. The plate discipline still remains elite. So, Chris, we'll start with you. I assume that you're comfortable using a top 5 or 6 pick on Jose Ramirez. Would you maybe push him up into the top 3 to assure that you get the best third baseman in the game?
Yeah, he's my number 4 player in head-to-head points, and I believe he's number 4 or 5 in Roto. He's number 5 in Roto, 4 in head-to-head points.
That's
and
exactly
it's not
how I have him,
it's not really a third bases shallow thing for me. It's Jose Ramirez is just a freaking stud. Part of it is, I would rather pay the premium for him than anyone else at the position that you're going to have to pay the premium for if you're going to pay the position premium. But it's also, there are not many true 5 category studs. And Jose Ramirez, okay, maybe he's not a batting average stud. Maybe he's more like a C plus in batting average. Your average fantasy player hit about 261 last season, fantasy starters, and he hit 266. So he might be a little above average, but he's a superstar everywhere else. He's an A to A plus contributor in runs, home runs, RBI, stolen bases. And so, that alone makes him, one of the most valuable players in fantasy, regardless of whether there are other good third basemen available. Nobody comes close to what he's capable of.
Yeah, surely. You're 100% right about that. I remember last year we were, or at least I was, I don't want to put words in, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I feel like collectively the industry was a little bit worried about Jose Ramirez because they trade away Francisco Lindor and you look at the rest of that lineup and you're like, oh, it's pretty bad, but man, he made the most of the opportunity here.
I do remember having to talk people off that ledge multiple times last year. Now that you mention it, but man.
200.
The thing is
214 runs plus RBI. I mean, that is a truly elite mark in one of the worst lineups in baseball. So that is just a testament to truly how good Jose Ramirez was.
Yeah, when you get on base, 230 to 240 times a year and you hit 70 extra base hits per year and you steal bases efficiently and do all those things, like you're going to get the counting stats, whether it's, I don't know, maybe in a better lineup, he gets 115 runs and 110 RBI. But, for the most part, a player's, lineup, the biggest impact that a player's lineup has is how many plate appearances they get. Players tend to own their production more or less. Now that fluctuates from one year to year, from one player to the next, but generally speaking, most of a player, 90% is the number I've seen in various studies, comes down to just what a player himself does, regardless of team context. And, then there's park factors and all that stuff, but none of that's negative for him.
And I think that's especially true when you got a profile like Ramirez, a guy who can get on base on his own. Well, he's on base a lot. I mean,
but doesn't run into outs,
and he doesn't, and he can hit the ball out of the park. A lot of guys get run in RBI production, and it's clear that like if you remove them from that context, it might not go as well. But like like Ramirez has the kind of profile that sustains itself, and he's now proven it.
Doesn't run into outs on the base paths, doesn't really ground into a lot of double plays. He just he doesn't take things away from himself. And the RBI thing, he puts the ball in play a ton. And that helps you rack up RBIs, because even when you don't get a hit, you know, if you've got a guy on third, you've got a chance to drive in a run if you put the ball in play, especially since he's such a fly ball heavy player.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll add on Jose Ramirez, he hit 266 last year, which again, it doesn't hurt your batting average in a roto categories league, but his XBA, according to StatCast, was 284. That was his best mark since 2017. So I wouldn't project that. I wouldn't expect it, but there's a chance. There's a chance that he's a better batting average contributor this upcoming season than he was last year. We move on to the second round, and that includes Rafael Devers and Manny Machado. Devers going at pick 17.0 and Manny Machado at pick 22.8. Scott, I know towards the end of the season, we had a bit of a debate figuring out whether to take Rafael Devers versus Manny Machado. They're both really, really good, and I would be happy to get either one of those. Where do you fall on that side of the coin, Rafael Devers versus Manny Machado?
Yeah, so I ended up siding with the consensus with Devers because, well, I mean, I guess him being so young, there's this possibility of untapped potential. But obviously, it's hard to criticize Machado's track record, obviously. And he was, according to StatCast, one of the biggest underachievers last year, 295 XBA versus 278 BA, 531 X slug versus 489 slug. And really the main thing, like he had a dozen steals, and it wasn't his best steal season. It wasn't his worst steal season, but there are often a relevant number of steals from Manny Machado, and there's rarely been that from Rafael Devers. And at a time when people are elevating, just 12 to 15 steals, what seems like a modest number of stolen bases, more than ever before. Like those guys are getting pushed up sometimes 40 spots ahead of guys with comparable stats otherwise. It's a little weird to me that more people aren't in favor of ranking Machado ahead of Devers, but it's a close call. If I was picking at the 2-3 turn and Devers was still there, I'd probably take something else and hope to get Machado with my third pick. So, I guess I don't expect to have many shares of Devers because of that. But yeah, I guess Devers slightly ahead for me.
Here's a statistic. So the average production from a first place team per lineup spot last season among 14 hitters in Roto leagues was 272 average, 25 homers, 80 runs, 77 RBI, 11 steals. That was the average production from your average first place team. The only 9 hitters to hit those marks in each category were Fernando Tatis, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, Paul Goldschmidt, Kyle Tucker, Bo Bichette, Tyler O'Neill, Teoscar Hernandez, and Manny Machado. Pretty good.
There you go.
That's legit 5 category production. Obviously 12 steals, just barely gets you over the hump of that 11 steal mark, but still, he's a legitimate 5 category contributor.
And that was with him seemingly underperforming.
Yeah.
What the data said he should have done. So I mean, Machado's been a first round type player many years.
He's actually going slightly later than he was last season.
Yeah.
There you go.
Which is, I think people look at the face value stats here, the surface stats, and maybe just gets pushed down ever so slightly from where he was last year because of that. But Scott, you referenced the expected numbers were much better for Manny Machado. The home run to fly ball rate, especially curious for me, dropped from 20% in the shortened 2020 to 14% last year. And he actually hit the ball way harder, not just on average, like whenever he would put the ball in play. When he hit fly balls and line drives, 96.8 mile per hour average exit velocity on those batted balls, 18th best in baseball. That is an elite mark, and his home run to fly ball ratio went down. So it's just kind of curious. I think that there's a chance that Machado bounces back in a big way. He hits 285 plus, 30 to 35 home runs, and obviously all the counting stats and the steals. However, Kris, what do you think about this? Because as long as Jace Tingler was the manager of the Padres, they would run. They were very aggressive on the base paths. He came from the Rangers organization. If you followed the Rangers the past couple of years, they've been very aggressive on the base paths as well. Jace Tingler is no longer the manager of the San Diego Padres. It is now Bob Melvin. And while Bob Melvin was with the Oakland A's from 2011 to 2021, this is a huge sample size. So I'm not sure this is even sticky or it's even fair to compare between organizations. But the Oakland A's ranked 24th in steals. So does that influence you at all? That maybe we see the steals go down for the entire Padres team?
That one's tough because, the Oakland A's are famously a pretty analytically heavy team, and that might just be a reflection of an organizational standard that, he was adhering to. But yeah, Machado's at that point in stolen bases where, you go from one every 12 games to one every 16 games or something like that, and all of a sudden you're going from 12 to 8. Maybe he sprains an ankle, doesn't run for a month. All of a sudden you're down to like 5. And then, it's not hard to go from, hey, he gives you a little something in stolen bases to, he's not really doing much for you. And it could just be like, what did he run? 16 times last season?
15
times. It could also just be he goes, 9 for 15 instead of 12 for 15. That's a minuscule difference in the grand scheme of things. And all of a sudden, it starts to look a little less great. So that's probably the one place that you feel least comfortable with Machado. I think batting average would probably be the other one, but I would probably rather draft him coming off, I don't know, a down year, but his value has stayed the same or gone down a little bit rather than Devers, who I love. I drafted a ton of Devers last year, but he's going 2 rounds higher this season than last year. I thought he was an obvious value last year. Now, 17th overall or wherever he is just a teeny tiny bit rich for a guy who in a best case scenario is a 4 category guy.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think I would still take Devers over Machado. I think the counting stats are a little bit safer. The Padres lineup is still just kind of meh. And Devers did improve his plate discipline quite a bit last year. Career high 9% walk rate. The strikeouts were very manageable for Devers as well. So I think it's close, but I would still take Devers just slightly ahead of Manny Machado. Be wary of those steals too. I wonder if we can get maybe something like 5 to 7 out of Machado, and obviously that would affect his value quite a bit.
That's what I've been saying when I've criticized a lot of these 15 steal guys for getting pushed up so much because of they might give you 15 steals. Like, you can't really pencil that in. Like, you reach a threshold in steals where it's just like it's so quickly reduced to nothing. It wouldn't change. It wouldn't take that big of a change in the player's approach on the base paths for 15 to become essentially nothing. Yeah. And so, I don't mind hyping up Machado's steals potential when he's not being elevated because of the steals. It doesn't seem to me anyway, because he's going behind Devers.
The one thing I guess would be I'm trying to think of another example of a guy who's like that, but with Machado, it kind of feels like the range is maybe 8 to 14 or 8 to 15. And obviously these numbers are, fudgy anyway, but whereas some of the guys who are in that 15 range, you could see them getting to 20.
Like a Lindor.
Yeah.
Like a Lindor, you could see 12 to 20 for Lindor. Yeah.
And so that's
it's probably actually 6 to 20 for Lindor.
Maybe. Really. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, steals obviously are very fickle. But yeah, just be wary when it comes to Manny Machado. We finally get to Austin Riley, who's going in the 4th round. He has an ADP of 40.3. He turns 25 years old in early April. He was awesome last year. 23rd overall in Roto. He averaged 3.1 fantasy points per game. That was tied for 4th best at the position. A 303 batting average, 33 homers, 91 runs, 107 RBI. Scott, he hit a bunch of line drives, 10th best among qualified hitters. But with that, the BABIP was still very high. It was 368, 3rd highest in baseball. Obviously, that correlates with the line drive rate, but I think it's fair to expect some regression in the BABIP, in the batting average in general. Maybe he's more of like a 280 hitter than a 303 hitter, which would still be a very, very solid player. But just, I think in terms of what he did last year, the natural expectation should be we're going to regress these numbers a little bit moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And Austin Riley and Nolan Arenado both, when I was, first going through each player individually, making out my rankings at the start of the offseason, I looked at them and said, you know what? I'm probably going to be behind the consensus on these guys. But then the position just forced my hand, and it looks like I'm actually ahead of the consensus because of that position scarcity aspect. Like, I don't want to be the one left out and scrounging all season to get adequate production at the position. So, even understanding that Austin Riley, it's unlikely he's going to hit 380 again, or 300 again. Maybe it'll be more like 280. 30 plus homers. Yeah, I think you can go ahead and pencil him in for that. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Nolan Arenado, I know we're not to him yet, but I don't really see him bouncing back much, if at all, in batting average after hitting around, I think it was like 255 his first season out of Colorado. I just think his batted ball profile outside of that BABIP inflating environment with the thin air and the giant outfields, he sells out pretty hard for power, and you'll take it. You'd rather have the power than you'd rather have the 30 plus homers than, a 280 batting average. But I don't think there's much room for the batting average to improve for him outside of Colorado. I think it's kind of the Mike Moustakas formula for success for Nolan Arenado now, and really limits his upside. So I'm not expecting. I'm expecting a small step back for Riley, and I'm not expecting any kind of step forward for Nolan Arenado. And yet, I will possibly take Riley at the end of round 3. I'll possibly take Arenado at some point in round 5, just so I don't have to worry about the position anymore.
Kris, I think it's a dangerous game that we play when we elevate players because of position scarcity. I'm not saying that it's the wrong thing to do. I mean, there have been drafts where I'll see where Austin Riley goes or Arenado, and I just don't want to draft them at their cost. There's been drafts where, again, Riley goes at the end of round 3 or Arenado will go in round 5, and we'll get to Arenado in just a second here. But, if you don't do that, the alternatives are, you might wind up with someone like Justin Turner or Yoan Moncada as your starting third baseman later on. So I see both sides of it, but I just feel like we're paying a premium now for Austin Riley going in this like 4th round range, and it's personally not something that I see myself doing. What do you think?
I think Austin Riley is one of the more obvious fades for me in this range. And it's not necessarily that I think he's bad. You look at the underlying numbers for last season, they largely back up what he did. He was a well above average hitter based on his expected stats. But this is one situation where it does just feel like something I try to talk about pretty regularly is the idea of just guys get hot. And it's not like it's not, one of these situations where like it was a total fluke that Austin Riley hit this well. He really did hit this well last season. I just don't necessarily trust the skill set to be consistent from year to year. And, there was a little bit of worrisome signs towards the end of last season. If you basically from September 1st on, including the playoffs, he struck out 34% of the time. That's my concern, is that like he had this really, really awful stretch in the playoffs where he struck out, I think it was 25 times in 68 plate appearances. And that doesn't show up in the overall numbers. And so he's got this, really solid 25% strikeout rate. But was that a situation where maybe he just got cold? Or maybe he just avoided the kind of stretches that could derail a player of his type? And it just happened to be at the time when we don't group that in with his overall numbers. And so that's my concern with him, is just that I think there are going to be stretches in his career for the player he is where he's just lost. We saw that, it was 2019.
Yeah, 29. In 2020, he actually had an even better strikeout rate than last year. It was only 23.8. But he got very hot when he first got called up in 2019. I think it was like 9 home runs in his first 18 games, and then basically did nothing but strike out the rest of the time he was up. obviously has developed a lot since then, or else.
Yeah.
You know,
I just think like, maybe the 272, 827 OPS, maybe that's more what he's like. That, the overall career numbers rather than what he was last season. And, maybe that makes him more of a, just a guy at the third base position where,
But what is that? That's the fact. What is just a guy at the third base position? Because just a guy sounds like
I
not
could
something
see
that many people are going to have at third base this year.
Yeah, that's fair, but like I could see his overall production not being that much more impactful than Justin Turner's. Obviously Justin Turner's age and his injury history, and even someone like Josh Donaldson, I think you could say the same thing. I think those guys could be around as good as him, but obviously the playing time concerns drop them a lot below him. But that's maybe why I'm less willing to pay the premium for Austin Riley.
Yeah, and that's again that's what comes with elevating players because of position scarcity. For what you guys both touched on there, he might be just a guy, but that is helpful at the third base position because obviously it's a very bad position. But in a vacuum, if you're talking about the end of the third round, early fourth round, I mean, you might wind up taking Austin Riley over someone like Aaron Judge or Yordan Alvarez, they're going to be, in my mind, much better, and they're much more proven.
They weren't last year. It's worth noting.
Right.
Austin Riley was not just a guy last year. And for what it's worth, I don't think he's just a guy.
No, I don't like.
I agree with that too. Yeah.
Just a guy being like an average starting first baseman rather than a, replacement level guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's because I mean, like, I was just referring to like 10 years ago when I was treating a position, elevating a position because of scarcity like I am third base. So, it's been a long time. People forget how impactful it could be and so it's worth reminding everybody that you have to look at it how you compare at this position versus how all of your opponents compare at the position versus how this player compares in production to all the players going around him. You are trying to get as many advantages as you can across your entire lineup. And if somebody like Riley or even Arenado can give you a clear advantage over half the league, it may not be a clear advantage. We may get a best case scenario from somebody like Bregman or Rendon or even like Matt Chapman and Yohan Moncada. If two or three of those guys bounce back in a significant way, then the advantage is lessened. I'll grant you that. But that's asking a lot. That's asking a lot. So, it's kind of the same reason why it's not to the same extent, but it's kind of the same reason why like Salvador Perez at catcher so much this year you're so clearly getting an advantage over your competition with that pick. I don't think it's as clear that you're getting it with somebody like Riley, but it's one of the few places in the entire player pool where you can look at the distribution of talent and say, okay, this advantage looks pretty black and white to me.
Yeah. And I think overall, Scott, you're right about that from the third base perspective. But that's why I'd rather put more of an emphasis on making sure I get one of those second round guys, right? Because I know clearly those guys are going to give you an advantage. And it probably just comes down to how you feel about Austin Riley. If you think that he is a difference maker, again, like I feel like we're probably, talking down Riley too much. I still think he's a really good player. I don't like the cost personally in the fourth round. And this is more of like a fantasy philosophy kind of thing. But last year I loved Riley and he was going outside the top 200.
Oh yeah.
Now he's going inside the top 50. So it's hard for me to like get over that and now use a top 50 pick on him.
Well, and just as a general rule of thumb, like betting against that type of player usually works out. Like in the long run, you'll profit betting against the guy who jumps up 200 spots in ADP. And one thing about the position scarcity thing that I not to get too bogged down in this spot in the podcast, although that's what we do. in these position previews, but I think it's an important and interesting discussion.
Yeah, no, for
is
sure.
the position scarcity game. The thing about that is you never want to be stuck fighting last year's war, or the last war, I guess would be, the French in preparation for World War II built this huge trench system in the place where they got invaded during World War One. And so what happened during World War II is they just went around it. And so, that's the concern, is that you're prepping for something that may not happen. And so third base may just be really shallow. Or maybe Anthony Rendon and Alex Bregman just had down years. Like maybe Anthony Rendon just hurt his hip and he'll be fine. He was really good the year before. All the underlying metrics were still really good. Maybe DJ LeMahieu bounces back and hits 310. And so that's always the concern for me, is putting a premium on it, acknowledging it and being aware of it, and maybe even drafting with that in mind, I think makes sense. But like with Riley, putting such a premium on it, on a guy who I still think is a pretty big question mark, that's where I lose the stomach for it a little bit. It's not that I think he's bad. It's just that, like, you look at guys being drafted around him and
he's going ahead of Pete Alonso, right? Like someone who we're all pretty excited about, and we know that he has pretty massive upside too. Like, to me, that's kind of crazy.
Well, but Austin Riley was better than Pete Alonso last year.
He was.
Like, is he likely to be better than Nick Castellanos?
It depends where Castellanos signs.
To a certain extent, but yeah, like
I think it does a lot.
But I think the thing is, like, passing on Castellanos, or taking Riley ahead of Castellanos, or Teoscar Hernandez, one of those guys who could give you legitimate 5 category production, or Byron Buxton, who I think just has much more upside. It's not just about the third base position. It's also about trying to put together the best team you possibly can. And so,
well, yeah,
that's where
that's a big part of it. Yeah. I don't want to belabor the point, but I have a counter to both of the thoughts you guys brought up, Chris, and with regard to not fighting last year's battles. I hear what you're saying, and I mean, it kind of backfired with me on me last year with the starting pitcher thing. It was kind of fighting the previous 2 years' battles, but nonetheless, the environment changed drastically, and I was left holding the bag. But I look at third base, and we'll get to him more. We'll talk about it more when we get to sleepers, breakouts, and busts. And I don't see a lot of ways that the position can improve. I think there are 4 players who drastically underperformed, and maybe some of them will bounce back to some extent. But there aren't a lot of up and comers who can step in and claim the mantle if they don't. And then with regard to targeting a second round third baseman, Frank, like Rafael Devers or Manny Machado, the reason I haven't been as inclined to do that is because the first and second round are where you can get a huge advantage at every single position. Like all the players going in that range stand out so much from the crowd at each of their respective positions that I kind of don't want to pass up the opportunity to get a more obvious advantage in the outfield or at shortstop or first base or wherever, which I would have to do if I took Devers or Machado. So I'm not saying I want to take Devers and Machado in round 2, but it pretty much would have to be the 2-3 turn for me.
But that's where I disagree, Scott, because if you think that Devers and Machado are worthy of returning second round value, which they've done consistently now in their fantasy baseball careers, then why wouldn't you target them over an outfielder or another position? Because again, it's the same reason that you just spoke about targeting Austin Riley, is that you don't want to be left there without one of those third basemen.
And it depends on the guy too. Like,
I just have a lot more trust in Devers and Machado living up to their draft costs in the second round.
I guess Teoscar Hernandez versus Aaron Judge versus George Springer. Who's really going to be the better of those next year? I have no idea. And yet they're going between rounds 3 and 5. I think there's a good chance Machado and Devers are better than Riley. But I'm talking about Riley versus what half the league is going to be starting at third base.
Right, know? But I think part of it is also, I think Teoscar Hernandez, George Springer, and Aaron Judge are probably all going to be better than Austin Riley
Yeah, but
road.
that's a different position. So it's really
Right.
you're comparing positions against themselves.
And a lot of it comes down to like which permutation of the position combination you end up getting. Cause like it's possible that Mookie Betts falls below Rafael Devers, in which case it doesn't matter which third baseman I get. I'm going to be happy that I have Mookie Betts instead of Rafael Devers. You know,
Right.
I'm probably going to prefer to have Freddie Freeman over Rafael Devers. And it doesn't really matter which other third baseman I get.
Yeah.
So it also depends on where things fall. But if it's like, you know, Luis Robert and Austin Riley or Rafael Devers and George Springer, then that starts to get a little more interesting. And, you know, I think you can go either way on it. I would probably lean the Devers Springer side, but I also think like Springer might, the potential for Springer to have the Marcus Semien season is probably being underrated. And so that just, I think Springer is probably just a good value.
All right. Well, we are 35 minutes in and we've talked about 4 third basemen. So
yeah, but they're the only third basemen who matter.
yeah, no,
we've sprinkled in discussion about other third basemen. Come on.
And
it's a relevant conversation. Like,
and
no
there's
doubt
also,
about it. I think
the guy who might win stolen bases single-handedly.
yeah, don't worry. We'll get to him in just a second. Before we hit the break, we do have another live mock draft stream this Wednesday when you're likely watching or listening to this, February 16th, 8 p.m. Eastern time. This time it is a Roto/categories startup dynasty draft. I know myself, Scott, we're going to be here, going to try and get a prospect dynasty type guest on as well. So if you'd like to come watch live, hang out, we're doing a Roto startup dynasty draft this Wednesday, today at 8 p.m. Eastern time on our YouTube channel. Make sure to come check it out. All right, when we return, we're going to talk about Nolan Arenado, Adalberto Mondesi, and a bunch of other third basemen here on Fantasy Baseball Today. All right, so let's quickly run through Nolan Arenado. The ADP is 57.5, and going into this process, I just assumed that I was going to be in on Nolan Arenado, and the more you look at the numbers, the more it's just, do I really want to do this? I don't know. Look, his first season with the Cardinals, it was solid. 255 batting average, 34 homers, 81 runs, 105 RBI. The counting stats obviously are solid. He's been incredibly durable, something I'll give him credit for as well. 155 plus games in each of his last 6 full seasons. However, first year out of Coors, 255 batting average and 249 BABIP plummeted. I mean, that is way down from his career marks. And we expected that, but to this level, probably not. Personally, I thought he would be more of like a 260, maybe a 270 hitter. But
I mean, 255 isn't far off from 260.
Sure.
To be fair to yourself, Frank.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. He kind of reminds me of Austin Riley, where we're elevating him because he plays third base. I know he's been durable, and I just don't like.
Well, and in Arenado's case,
you present that as if it's an inherent wrong, and I don't think you should think that way.
But in Arenado's case, you know, Austin Riley has the underlying numbers to back up what he did. You know, he wasn't quite as good as the underlying numbers, but he was still, the underlying numbers suggested he was very, very good. The underlying numbers for Nolan Arenado suggested that he was bad, like a well below average hitter in terms of his expected outcomes. 248 XBA, 420 expected slugging. That is a 172 expected isolated slugging percentage, which is pretty average for modern day Major League Baseball, maybe slightly above average. And he is one of those guys who he basically just does not elevate the ball with authority anywhere but the pull side. He is like all down the left field line. And the thing with that is, he was 117th out of 132 qualified players in average home run distance. You know, we talked about how that was a red flag with someone like DJ LeMahieu or Kevin Biggio. Obviously, Nolan Arenado hits a lot more home runs than those guys. But yeah, I mean, max home run distance was 408 feet. That is really low. That is actually one of the 6 lowest among qualified hitters. There are some worrying signs with Arenado, and he definitely feels like someone who is wringing the absolute most out of his skill set at this point. And
I
don't
feel
know.
like he's always been that, though. Like his
right,
expected
but Coors
stats
Field
in
covered
Colorado
up.
didn't
Coors Field really helps you out with that.
He's never hit the ball very hard. He's always put it in the air a ton. But, I mean, It's like I said before, it's the Mike Moustakas path to success. When you make a lot of contact like he does, you can get away with a really low. When you make a lot of contact and you put the ball in the air a ton, you could get away with a really low BABIP because you're a high enough percentage of your hits are home runs, and you're not giving away at bats with a ton of strikeouts. So I think this is kind of what I was hoping he would be in St. Louis, what he was last year, and because he was that, I feel pretty comfortable with it going forward.
And the other thing to point out is his expected home runs were actually 38. So by that measure, he might have gotten a little unlucky. So I don't know. He feels like he's a player who there's a very slim margin for error, but he hasn't fallen on the wrong side of it outside of, one bad season. And that was really a bad 60 games. So yeah, he's fine. He's fine here.
The splits were bad too, for what it's worth. He crushed lefties, which, kind of feeds into him making the most of, his skill set at this point. Mm-hmm. He's not great against righties, and he was much better on the road. Like, he did not play well in St. Louis last year. So look, if you're telling me I could get a 2-round discount on Arenado versus Riley, I would rather have Arenado. Based on ADP, they only go 1 round apart, but I feel like a lot of the mock drafts we've done, Riley goes in the 4th, maybe even the 3rd, and Arenado goes in the 6th round. I would take the discount there, but if you're telling me they're going 1 round apart, probably just not going to draft either, being perfectly honest. Next up, we have Adalberto Mondesi and Alex Bregman in the 6th round. Adalberto Mondesi, the ADP is 66.5. For Bregman, it's 69.8, which is on the rise on Fantasy Pros, mostly because of CBS, where Bregman's ADP is 48. Obviously, we do a lot of points league drafts and a lot of points league mock drafts. So I'm sure that does elevate Alex Bregman quite a bit because he still is a standout in plate discipline, despite anything else that's going on with him, the injuries, the fact that his home run production has taken a huge step back the past couple of years. He still is a huge standout in plate discipline. He's got 2 very polar opposite players. Adalberto Mondesi, his 150 game pace since the start of 2018, 24 homers, 63 steals. Is he ever going to play 150 games? Probably not. So 2 very different players. What is the format where you draft Adalberto Mondesi in? And what do you think about this price tag for Alex Bregman now in the 6th round?
Well, I mean, they are clearly specialists in opposing formats, right? Bregman, I treat Bregman as like he's in that same tier with Riley and Arenado in a points league because he's going to get a big advantage with the plate discipline. And then Mondesi, obviously, he's going to have more value in any kind of categories league where steals are rewarded beyond what they are in a points league. So we're talking maybe as much as 10 rounds difference in those 2 formats for Mondesi where he goes. And to be fair, I think if everything goes right for Mondesi, he's probably a stud in points leagues too. Mm-hmm. But you're more willing to roll the dice on the health in a categories league, I feel like, because the steals are like he could be the only steal source you need, basically, if things go right for him. And that's why I'm more inclined to draft him, particularly now that he's more like a 6th, 7th rounder, and in previous years, more like a 3rd, 4th rounder. A head-to-head categories league where you're tallying up your score 1 week at a time. Any week he's healthy, he's going to single-handedly win you that category. It's almost a lock that you're going to win that category because of Mondesi. If it ends up being only half the weeks, that's still a pretty big advantage. Yeah. Like I feel like you shouldn't stress so much about the health track record for Mondesi in head-to-head categories specifically, as opposed to Roto, where obviously steals are being calculated over the course of the season, and if you've built your whole steal strategy around Mondesi and he ends up missing half the season, it's a big problem for you.
Kris, for Mondesi, the basic measures that we use to judge a hitter, plate discipline, OPS, WRC+, he is awful at all of those, but at the same time, he possesses as much upside as maybe anybody in fantasy baseball. The problem, he hasn't played more than 102 games in the majors. This is typically the profile, or I guess, the risk that you'd be willing to take. Are you willing to do that here in the 6th round? I will say, just for Mondesi, I'm much more likely to draft him in a shallower league just because the replacement value is obviously much better there.
So I think there are 2 things that you can point out with Adalberto Mondesi that highlight the duality of his fantasy value. One, he had as many or more stolen bases in 2020 as 14 major league teams. It's
crazy.
If he was a single team, he would have finished tied for 17th in stolen bases in 2020. However, that is the only season in his entire professional career, which dates back to, I believe, 2012. Yeah, when he was 16 years old, where he's played more than 127 games paced out. Obviously, he only played 59. He missed 1 game in that. And now there was one season where I believe he had a performance-enhancing drug suspension that cost him a significant chunk of the season. So it's not like he's gotten injured every single season. It's just every single season except for 2 in a now 10-year major league or professional career. So I don't know, man. I like drafting Byron Buxton when he's significantly discounted because it's like, well, he keeps running into walls and hopefully that won't happen. But Mondesi is just like, this guy just like literally cannot stay healthy for more than 2 months at a time. He's just at no point in his professional career has he really ever been able to do that. And so at some point you do have to assume that he just can't. If he plays 140 games, if he plays 130 games, he's a steal at this price because last season to finish in 6th place in stolen bases in your average 12-team Roto league, you needed 102 stolen bases to finish in 6th place. Actually, 97. Sorry. If he plays 130 games, he's probably going to steal 50 bases. And if he steals 50 bases, that means you've got to average 4 stolen bases from the rest of your team to finish in 6th place. If he steals 50 bases, you've got to average about 5 to get there with the rest of your team to finish in 3rd place. And so, like, if he does that, you basically don't need to worry about stolen bases. The problem is, can you really draft a team with that in mind with Adalberto Mondesi? Because if he does get hurt, which seems like overwhelmingly likely outcome, you're screwed. Mm-hmm. Because if you draft more steals and he stays healthy, then it doesn't matter because you have way too many steals. And so it's this constant like back and forth. And this is the thing that's really fun about trying to build a Roto lineup and figuring out how to best balance those things. But I don't know. It seems like it's probably not worth the headache, but it's probably one of the more high upside moves you can make in a draft. It's one of the the handful of potential clear, obvious differentiators that you can get on your team if it works out. I don't know if there's anybody else in baseball, actually, that can give you as much of a clear difference as Adalberto Mondesi can in a Roto league if he stays healthy.
Yep. This is the lowest draft cost we've seen in a while for Adalberto Mondesi, but even with that, everything that we just said about him, I'm not going to wind up with Mondesi. So there you go. I don't know that maybe
I'll draft him.
Maybe I'm just not going to wind up with a 3rd baseman this year because it feels like that's
you know what? He's going to be on my team in TGFBI. That's drafting in a few days, right? It starts next Monday. I'm going to draft Mondesi in TGFBI. I hope nobody in my league's listening.
Yeah, I mean, you might not. You only have so much control over that. But honestly, Frank, you say I might not have a 3rd baseman because you don't want Mondesi either. Like that might be the reason I'm cornered into taking Mondesi in a league, right? Is just because, like, thankfully he's not a shortstop anymore. He's a 3rd baseman, so that makes it a little easier to stomach too. For the most part, I agree with you. Like, I don't see myself drafting much of him. Again, the head-to-head categories format is where the math changes for me.
It's the kind of thing where you can't say no. If you're drafting multiple teams, you can't not have him on one of them. There's just, you're trying to win. Like, that's the thing, is if you're playing 10 leagues, if you're playing 20, Frank, you're probably going to play 30 leagues this year. And you're trying to win those leagues, right?
I don't think I'm going to have Mondesi on any of them, Chris.
But you're trying to win those leagues.
There's other ways to do it.
There are, but like having zero of the guy who might steal 75 bases and the second place guy might steal 30. Like, that's legit. It's legitimately possible that he has 40 more stolen bases than any other player in baseball.
I hear you.
If you're playing 30 leagues, 20 leagues, 10 leagues, 5 leagues, just from a game theory perspective, you have to have him on at least one of them.
Won't be me. Hashtag never Mondesi.
We've talked about Mondesi too much already, but I do want to mention that Dayton Moore said toward the end of last season, they're at the point where they don't feel like they can count on him to be an everyday player anymore. And it's not clear exactly how to interpret that, as in they're not going to try to play him every day, or they're just expecting him to get injured at some point. But that might put a limit on how many games he's even capable of playing. It might limit it to only 120 or so, but it might not.
Yep. I think we're probably on pace for our first 2-hour podcast ever. So
let's do it. Let's do
it. Scott, real quick, Alex Bregman, I know you did a lot of research on this and the fact that the deadening ball has decreased the power of, guys like Bregman and Rendon and even Francisco Lindor, who we spoke about yesterday. He had 31 homers in 2018, 41 homers in 2019, just 18 home runs in 2020 and 2021 combined. That's 133 games. What, in your opinion, oh, by the way, he's coming off of wrist surgery, which he had in November, so that could obviously affect power as well. What is a realistic expectation for Bregman this upcoming season?
I think it's 25. I'm not willing to project more than that. He was on a 21 homer pace last year. And, because of injuries and stuff, I feel like some of his normal production was off. So I'll give him a little more than that. But I'm not willing to project 30 again. Clearly not willing to project 40 again. And yeah, I think it's worth stapling Bregman and Rendon together on this, because percentile average exit velocity, 43rd percentile for Bregman, 40th percentile for Rendon. They're right in that really scary range. And for what it's worth, Rendon, who missed even more time with injury last year, was only on a 16 homer pace. So,
but unlike Bregman, that 43rd or 46th percentile, whatever it was a huge outlier for Rendon. He has been, a well above average, average exit velocity guy for most of his career.
Has been
80, 86, 87, 81, 72, 71, leading up to 2021 in terms of average exit velocity.
Yep. And with Rendon, look, we'll get to him in just a second, but he's just one season removed from having a 915 OPS. I realize that's short in 2020, but if you go one season further back, he was amazing in his contract year where he had an OPS over 1,000. So he's getting up there in age. He's 31 years old, but we will get to Rendon in just a second. Chris, maybe the third baseman that I might actually look to target this year is the player who I was probably most adamant about not drafting last year, and it's Kris Bryant. His ADP is 86.8. He's going in the 8th round. He's 30 years old. He's currently a free agent. He bounced back in a big way, 265 batting average, 25 homers, 86 runs, 10 steals. The RBI total was lower because he was hitting near the top of the lineup, whether he was playing with the Cubs or with the San Francisco Giants. He had an awesome April and May. Completely plummeted in June, playing through injury during that time, which is pretty common for Kris Bryant, I will admit. But then he bounced back a big way the rest of the season as well. So I feel like of all the players we've talked about, cost versus what they can realistically provide, Kris Bryant kind of feels like the best value of maybe any third baseman that we've talked about in this mid-tier.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we talked about a lot last year, and one of the reasons why I wasn't as down on him as a lot of people, was his batted ball metrics don't look good at all. 29th percentile on average exit velocity last season. That was his best since 2017. 29th percentile. So that's really bad. But it's a little misleading because he barrels the ball. He's in the 72nd percentile in barrels total, 67th in barrel rate. ex-WOBA 68th percentile. That's pretty much where he's lived since that MVP season. He outperforms his expected metrics most of the time. They just, for whatever reason, they don't seem to capture how good of a hitter Kris Bryant is. There are outliers and everything, and he seems to be one of them. So I don't worry too much about the ugly batted ball data. I think, where he's being drafted is devalued because we don't know where he's going to play. There was one whisper that the Rockies might be interested in him, which would be awesome.
That would make things interesting, yeah.
But yeah, I think
I feel like Bryant's kind of the just a guy at third base, right? Who you elevate
Nolan
because there's not
Arenado-y.
many just a guys at third base. But
he's a little Nolan Arenado-y.
Yeah.
And obviously Arenado gets a big boost because you can probably pencil him in for 10% more plate appearances at the very least. But the difference between them, I don't think is that big otherwise. So, if Kris Bryant did end up in Colorado, I could see him hitting 290 with 35 homers.
Yeah, I would definitely change things. Bryant would jump quite a bit in my rankings.
I think he'd be there with Riley and Arenado.
Exactly.
Probably between them.
100%.
Right.
But, given that we don't know that and that his counting stats tend to be a little underwhelming, even, especially the run production, the RBI number tends to be pretty underwhelming. He hasn't had more than 77 in a season since that MVP 2016. I do think Kris Bryant is sort of just a guy, but he's just a guy who has no premium on his price, so I'm fine drafting him where he is.
Yeah, I'd rather take the just a guy at third base in the 8th round versus, again, this comes down to how you feel about Austin Riley than doing it in the 4th round. Of course, I rank Austin Riley ahead of Kris Bryant. I think
Kris is saying Austin Riley's downside is just a guy. Stop calling Austin Riley just a guy, okay?
Well, his downside, I mean,
are already upset that he wasn't the MVP last year.
Well, they're wrong.
They are wrong.
He can be he wasn't the most valuable player on their own team. That's fine, but
yeah,
I do think his downside's probably lower than just a guy, but it's not a super realistic outcome, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I'm more likely to draft Kris Bryant than Austin Riley.
All right, let's quickly talk about Anthony Rendon. The ADP is 100.5. He is going in the 9th round. He is now 31 years old. He had surgery in the middle of August to repair a hip impingement. Before that, 240 batting average, 6 homers, 58 games played, a 712 OPS, which is far and away his lowest since back in 2015, basically. The 4 previous seasons before that, 909 OPS or better. Scott, you had the pleasure of talking about expectations and projecting Alex Bregman. What do you think about Anthony Rendon? What's something that we can realistically expect from him this upcoming season?
So I will say 20 home runs potentially. And for most of his career in Washington, that's kind of what he was. He always hit for a high average, always got on base a lot. So the counting stats, apart from home runs, were pretty good, but the home runs were pretty average. And then he had that 1 year right before hitting free agency, 2019, where all of these guys had career high in home runs, where he got 34 home runs. The reason I think he deserves to go a few rounds after Bregman is because he's 4 years older. And that makes the drop in production scarier. It makes the injury risk more palpable. And it makes me not have a lot of faith in him. It could be a great pick in round 10. But even when I've been shut out at third base to that point, I've had a hard time pulling the trigger. There's just still a lot of hitters I trust more there. And, in retrospect, I think I usually end up regretting passing on Rendon in round 10 because I end up with somebody really bad at third base. But Rendon himself might not end up being that useful. So it's like I was saying at the top, I feel like you're kind of reaching for everybody at third base unless you just take whatever's left.
No, and that is a good point too. I mean, I criticize you about, taking Austin Riley in the 4th round versus some of the talent that's around him. Well, we've been telling everyone, hey, take your chance on an upside player around pick 100, Cody Bellinger, Bobby Witt. Well, if you do that, then you're not getting Anthony Rendon and vice versa. If you want to take Anthony Rendon there, then you're probably missing out on some of those upside players like Bellinger or Yelich or Bobby Witt. So you got to make a decision somewhere.
Kyle Schwarber goes after that. I mean, round 10 is like Giancarlo Stanton territory, right? There's some really useful players going in that same range.
Rendon does have the potential to be like not the same kind of production as Rafael Devers, but as productive. I mean, the 4 years
he's
prior,
been a 2nd round type player before, and not just the 34 homers.
Yeah, the 4 years prior to 2021, there was basically no skills decline. He was between a 915 and a 937 and a 909 to a 1010 OPS in those 4 seasons. But take out the 1010 OPS, 909, 915, 937, 915 was in 2020. There was no sign of skill slippage at all before this injury. And so, his 162 game pace in those 4 seasons, 106 runs, 31 homers, 118 RBI, 307 batting average, nearly a walk per strikeout. So I think Rendon is probably the last guy who you could realistically say has a chance to end up being a legitimate difference maker for your team. And he's probably the 3rd baseman I'm going to draft the most this season, I would guess.
Yeah, look, this is the end of the tier. This is what I spoke about, the top 9. So, this group of Bregman, Kris Bryant, Anthony Rendon, I think, if you don't have a 3rd baseman at that point, you probably really have to start to think about it once you see these names approaching on your draft list. Real quick, put a bow on this conversation. Scott, who would you rather have at their cost? Bregman in the 6th, Bryant in the 8th. Let's say Anthony Rendon in the 9th based on his ADP.
I think I'd have to say Bregman. I feel like there's the least chance of things really going wrong with him. I do kind of want to echo a point Chris made there that, like, if you're going for maximum upside to cost at every position, like Rendon, I think is the 3rd baseman you target.
Yep.
Unless it's at Alberto Mondesi, I guess. Like if you're totally taking risk out of the equation and just what's the best upside for the buck, then I get the Rendon pick more. I guess I'm giving him only like a 30% chance of realizing that outcome anymore. Something like that.
All right. And obviously, if I ask you the same question, Chris, you're going to go with Anthony Rendon of that group, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. And honestly, at the cost, I probably am going to go with Kris Bryant. So, 3 different analysts, 3 different answers. And all 3, I will say, Bregman, Kris Bryant, and Anthony Rendon all should be standouts in points leagues. So if you play in points leagues again, like that, this is probably the range. Like you want to make sure you get one of those guys if you don't have one at that point. Let's get into sleepers, breakouts, and busing, and quickly move through this here. And sleepers, we will start with you, Chris. Who you got?
Alec Bohm, who I was completely out on coming into 2021 when he was like a top 100 pick on average, which I just thought was ludicrous. But now is he being drafted on average?
I don't think so.
Number 26 third baseman in NFC ADP, 285.2 is his ADP. So in your standard 12-team Roto League, Alec Bohm may not get drafted. And I think there were actually some somewhat good signs under his numbers last season. It was a disastrous season. He's really, really bad defender. All that stuff is true. But 89th percentile on average exit velocity, 82nd percentile on max exit velo, 90th percentile on average in hard hit rate, 70th percentile on expected batting average. That was my question about him. Can he hit the ball hard enough? And he kind of came out and answered that question. The problem is he, seems to have a vendetta against worms. And so he's trying to kill him with his swings. But if he elevates the ball just a tiny bit more and strikes out probably a significant amount less, but if he can get back into that 20% range that he was in 2020, I think Alec Bohm has some potential to emerge as a viable starting third baseman.
Yeah, I probably don't want him as even a starting corner infielder on my team or utility bat, but you don't have to draft him that way. You could draft him on the bench and see if he gets off to a hot start, maybe he actually becomes something in your league. But I mean, this is typically the player that you should target late in your draft, someone who is a former top prospect. He has that pedigree, and he's basically being written off now, and you're getting him for free. So again, like there's not much risk involved. I like this call quite a bit. The ADP 286 for Alec Bohm. Scotty, your sleeper at third base.
Like I said, I don't see a lot of room for things to get better here. To the point, I almost want to say Brian Hayes because he's somebody who sort of has a chance to get better, but like I don't like his ADP at all, so I'm not going to. I'd rather be discouraging about him. So I'm going to say Josh Young and Jose Miranda. I'm going to pair the two prospects who are on the verge of debuting here, because I feel like if you get totally burned at third base, they're your hope. Josh Young for the Rangers, Jose Miranda for the Twins. Young, spelled Jung, is the more projectable of the two. He has an amazing hit tool, and they fixed his swing to get into his power more in the minors, elevating better, pulling better. And his numbers were just monstrous in the minors last year. Great plate discipline. I think maybe after Bobby Witt, he might be the top prospect to target. I know he won't be. I know Adley Rutschman's going to go ahead, and maybe Julio Rodriguez too, and that's fine. But I think it may actually be Josh Young who's up the soonest and making an impact in fantasy. As amazing as Young's numbers were, Miranda's were probably even better for the Twins. Jose Miranda is the cousin of Lin-Manuel Miranda. I just want to mention that because it's amazing. And like the numbers he put up were like Pujols-ian. Like they were just absurd. The strikeout rate was very low, and he always showed good contact skills in the minors. It just the story is he figured out how to attack the pitches that he can do damage on, and did a lot of damage. Positionless player, so he doesn't show up very high in like the real world prospect rankings. It's not clear he's really capable of handling third base or anywhere else, but the Twins have a lot of holes, and he's at an age where he needs to be up. So I expect it to be up soon. And if he gets consistent at bats, it could pay big dividends in fantasy.
I guess you could say he is not throwing away his shot. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, let's save that for when he's up and playing well.
No, we're using it now.
All right.
Yeah. I do like those call outs quite a bit in a few draft and hold leagues that I've done. If I've waited at the position, I've done 5 drafts so far, and I wound up with Justin Turner in 2 of them, Brian Hayes in 1. It's not pretty. Jose Ramirez in another. Obviously that's great, but that's based on draft position, and Nolan Arenado in the other. So if you wind up with like a Turner or one of these like true fallback options, then yeah, want to take one of these prospects who have quite a bit of upside and see if you can hit on one of those guys very late in your draft. Sleeper for me, this is more so just undervalued. It's Josh Donaldson. I get it. He's old, hamstring, calf injuries. He's not going to play a full complement of games. I realize that, but his ADP is 194.3. Last year, he finished as the 125th player in Roto. He averaged 2.8 fantasy points per game. That was good enough to be a top 2, 4, 6, 8, top 10 third baseman in fantasy points per game. 2.8 is not a great number. That's just relative to this position, a reminder of just how bad third base is. But by all accounts, I mean, Josh Donaldson still crushed the ball, absolutely crushed the ball. You look at his StatCast page, it's a sea of red. I think that the Twins lineup is going to be better. Jose Miranda, hopefully involved sooner rather than later. And I think he'll probably get more games at DH this upcoming season. So hopefully that's something that can keep Donaldson healthy. So he's just going too late. I get it. He's old. He's boring. He's a veteran, but he's undervalued. So I like Josh Donaldson as a sleeper.
He's not actually boring. Him and Justin Turner are, I think, 2 excellent fallback options.
For sure. All right, breakout, and we will start with Scott this time. Who you have as a breakout at third base?
So I'm not going to need long for this one. Again, you could just as easily call him a bust, but I'm going to say Adalberto Mondesi. Wouldn't it be something if this is the year? People seem like they've kind of soured on him. The Royals are talking him down. And wouldn't it be awesome if this was the year he finally put it on to get all together, stayed on the field? It will have been a good time to invest in him if that's the case. Like I said, probably not going to do a lot of it myself, but him being third base eligible now instead of shortstop makes it more likely that I would.
So what you're saying is that Alberto Mondesi is going to be a bust in 2023 drafts.
Well, we'll see how 2022 goes. But yes, if it does play out as well as best case scenario, if he gets his best case scenario in 2022, then yeah, probably fade in 2023.
All right, Kris, breakout, third base.
Anthony Rendon. Bounce backs or breakouts. I already talked about it. I think the underlying skill set has shown very little signs of decline outside of the injury. The injury is concerning, hip injuries. Obviously, the older you get, I've got a bad hip myself. I understand it. But yeah, if he bounces back to pre-2021 numbers, he's going to be one of the best values in drafts.
Kris says he has a bad hip, but he plays in a flag football league. So, like, really, how bad is that hip, Kris?
I have to get stretched out like twice a day just
Kris,
to like make it through my day.
Kris is one of those old guys who shows up to the flag football and is like, his buddies are stretching him out.
Oh yeah.
Moving the leg one way, moving the leg another way, and stretching you out there, Kris. Scotty, I believe I'm with you. Josh Young, I think if we're talking about a prospect who can break out, I do like him quite a bit. Third base prospect for the Texas Rangers. The other one I'll call out is Jeimer Candelario. And I don't think he has true league winning potential, but he was really, really good in the second half last year. 282 batting average, 11 home runs, and 882 OPS. And that Tigers lineup is improving. Javier Baez, prospects are coming. Spencer Torkelson, Riley Green as well. So the counting stats could be better as well. I don't know that he has 300 batting average, 30 homer potential, but if he hits like 280 with 25 home runs and really strong counting stats, he's a great value where he's going.
He had a big second half. And I think he led the majors in doubles, right, for the whole season.
Yep. The American. Oh no, the majors. Yeah, it's italicized as well as bolded.
Yeah, 279.8 is the ADP for Candelario. So again, if you manage to miss out on everyone else, it might not be the worst last resort there in Jeimer Candelario. A bust. We will start with Kris.
I may have written this in your spot, but I feel like we might actually agree on this anyway. So I'll just stick with it. Austin Riley. I think there are more ways for him at his price to go wrong than for him at his price to go right. And I think he's a more volatile player than he showed last season. So, yeah.
Scotty, bust, third base.
So just like it's not a good position for sleepers and breakouts, I don't think it's a good position for bust either because so much has already gone so wrong for so many. I'm going to say Kris Bryant here because of that 29th percentile average exit velocity. I'm worried about the 40-ish for Rendon and Bregman, and 29th is even worse. As Kris points out, he has consistently outperformed that, but we only have a partial season from him in the environment with the new ball. And as we've talked about, the new ball wasn't even universally applied last year. It was kind of intermittent, the use of it. So I think it could even get worse for these guys moving forward. And if Bryant seems like somebody who could fall victim to that.
Bust for me is Austin Riley as well. What a jag. Scott and the Braves fans are going to
stinks.
Kill me for this one. No, I don't think that there's like bottom out potential for Austin Riley. I just personally think that he's overvalued where he's going. So
I think there's bottom out potential.
I'll leave it there.
I'll be the one to say it. Scott's a coward.
Ooh.
Frank's a coward.
How dare you? ADP review. Let's wrap up here. These are for 12-team leagues in the first round. Jose Ramirez going at 4.5. The second round, Rafael Devers at pick 17. Manny Machado at 22.8. Almost 25 picks later in the fourth round, Austin Riley, 46.3. In round 5, Nolan Arenado, an ADP of 57.5 in the sixth round. Alberto Mondesi at 66.5. You're going to see that probably 3 to 4 rounds later in a points league. Alex Bregman is more 69.8 in the eighth round. Kris Bryant, 86.8 in the ninth round. Anthony Rendon at pick 100.5. There are two going between picks 110 and 145 on average. DJ LeMahieu at pick 118 and Chris Taylor at pick 145. We spoke about LeMahieu on the first base preview. We spoke about Chris Taylor on the second base preview.
I don't think Taylor's third base eligible in CBS.
That's probably true. Oh, fantasy pros, you tricked me. You got
that would help the position a lot if he was.
Yeah, you're right about that. There are 3 going from picks 150 to 160, so very condensed here in this range of the draft. And if you miss out on Rendon or Bregman or Kris Bryant, then you might wind up with one of these guys. I've seen Scotty wind up with Yoan Moncada quite a bit so far in our mock drafts. The ADP for Moncada, 150.5. Brian Hayes at 154.8. And then Justin Turner at pick 157.5. And I know that he's older, injury prone. He was the 59th overall player in Roto last year. He averaged 3 fantasy points per game. When he plays, I still believe that Justin Turner is going to be really, really valuable. Scotty, what do you think about this group? Moncada, Hayes, Turner.
Yeah, Turner's my favorite of them. And I've kind of, when I have gotten shut out early on at third base, Turner is the guy I focus on getting, but I haven't quite, because I want to maximize the value, right? I know I have him ranked higher than the consensus. I've seen him go really late sometimes. And so I'm trying to find that right point in the draft when I need to go ahead and snatch him up. Because so far I've yet to land it the way I want to land it. Yeah, I mean, the thing about him is, if as old as he is, as injury prone as he is, if you almost have to have a backup plan, and it's just not a position where there are great backup plans. So it's definitely it definitely shouldn't be your plan A, but there are worse plan C's out there.
Yeah, you can go with the old and young strategy. But you could take Justin Turner and then back it up with someone like Josh Young, and
that's what you meant.
Those two, you get a quality player in fantasy baseball. Kris, at this point, I just don't really know where Yoan Moncada excels. It's been a weird past couple of seasons. He broke out in 2019 with the juice ball, did some really, really great things, hit 315, a 915 OPS. Since then, he's been a 705 OPS and a 787 OPS. He's not a standout in power. He's not a standout in speed. He's not a standout in batting average. I just don't really know what he provides and why his ADP, I guess, is still around pick 150.
Well, and he's not a standout in terms of how well he hits the ball anymore. That was the thing with him, in 2019 especially, but even before that, the issue was he was striking out too much, but he was doing a lot when he hit the ball. Now it's not quite as impressive, and so it is a little hard to get excited about him. I think the underlying skill set is still really, really impressive, but it's very, very fair to be skeptical about his abilities to put that skill set into play, and that's disappointing.
I think there are 2 players at third base who I look at and I just say, there aren't clear signs of there isn't anything in their profile that clearly indicates they're about to get better, but they're young enough and they've shown enough in past years that at this position where you have to see the glass half full in players, it kind of makes sense to see the glass half full with them. Moncada is one, and then the one I like even more is Matt Chapman.
Yes,
who goes a little bit later.
Year removed from hip surgery.
Yeah, that's why I can make a clearer case for him, because he last year was his first year off hip surgery. You could understand why he didn't impact the ball as well. It was the same hip surgery Buster Posey had. I believe it was 2018 that caused him to look like a diminished player in 2019, and most everybody wrote him off except for Chris Dowers. It seemed like because it just didn't look like he had any power anymore. But then he had more time to recover. Last year, bounced back with a huge year. And I'm hoping that can happen with Matt Chapman too, who showed 40 homer potential prior to that. The other weird thing going on with Chapman, though, is just his strikeout rate has also exploded. And that started the year before hip surgery. So how does that fit into that narrative? I don't really know.
One concern I'll bring up about Yoan Moncada is he can't hit lefties. There were signs of life in 2019. He had an 846 OPS against them, but he's been bad against them the last 2 seasons. He's got a 701 OPS against them for his career, 33% strikeout rate. That's the kind of thing that's just going to hold you back. That's kind of the long and short of it. He's going to have to be really, really good against righties, and usually he's just kind of okay.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add on Brian Hayes, I feel like we didn't really talk about him much here, but I feel like he's one of the hardest players to project this upcoming season because he hit a home run in either the first or second game of the season, and we're all excited. The player that's got love last year, and then he's dealing with this wrist injury after that for basically the entirety of the season. So I think it's perfectly fair that that's why he was as bad as he was last year. But we also have this track record in the minors where he wasn't really a great offensive player. So he's just kind of a hard player to figure out at this point in the draft.
Yeah, I think a little old. Like he's 25. He's not that old, but like he's not so young that you would be like, oh, there's nothing concerning about the fact that he was pretty bad last season.
Yeah,
I still think he has upside though. For I still think it's there. I don't know what the upside is.
It's impossible to know. But the way I evaluate Ke'Bryan Hayes, even as the guy who loved him last year, is okay. He got over 300 at bats last year. Granted, the wrist injury was early. Maybe it was still impacting him all season. You could make that case if you want to. But which seems more likely, that it was all the wrist, or that that 24-game sample where he looked amazing and showed power like he never did in the minors was just a fluky 24-game sample? Like, that seems like the more likely explanation, considering his minor league track record, than that it was all about the wrist. I can't say for sure. I can't say for sure, but that's why it's weird to me that he's being drafted at basically the same point he was a year ago. Because now the information we've received since then is mostly very discouraging.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair point. Most people are just throwing last year out and saying, look, he was hurt, and who knows, will he be healthy this upcoming season? I mean, this could be something that lingers as well. So ideally, probably not going to wind up with him, but I still think there's something there. Would not surprise me.
There might be some steals there, which I know is another reason why people like him, but it's the kind of steals range where we were talking about earlier with Manny Machado, where it could be 15, it could be nothing.
Yeah, 9 steals in 96 games last year. For what it's worth, all of the projection systems have him for double-digit steals this upcoming season. We have 3 more third basemen going between picks 170 and 190. The aforementioned Matt Chapman at 172.3. Eugenio Suarez at pick 187. We spoke about him on yesterday's podcast. Ryan McMahon at pick 188.3. Scott, I know that you spoke about Matt Chapman and why you like him. Chris, anything else that you'd like to add on Chappie?
No, I agree with him. With Scott, I think the bounce back potential is really nice, and I think it's a good price for it. So Chapman's definitely a late round pick to target.
Interested to see where he winds up too, because if he's traded, I think that's something that can help his value. If Matt Olson is traded away and Matt Chapman is not, then there's a real chance that the counting stats are just awful. I was looking through the Oakland A's lineup earlier today, and it is bad. It is really, really bad already.
It's a bad place to hit. It's, like I could see him having a big breakout whenever he gets traded, which seems inevitable. But as long as he's in Oakland, I think the best case scenario is probably still something like a 250 batting average with good power. So,
there was a rumor. You mentioned it there, Scotty, about Matt Chapman playing shortstop for the Yankees.
I would love to see it. He's my favorite baseball player to watch on defense, like maybe ever.
Yeah.
He is maybe the best third baseman I've ever seen in my life. He looks, how, I know we're at 123 minutes or an hour and 23, whatever, but let's just go for it. You know how Legolas in Lord of the Rings is just like, he seems like he's floating on the ground. There's a scene where they're walking in the snow and everybody's like, ugh! And he's just like literally floating on top of the snow. That's what Matt Chapman looks like. He's so light on his feet. His balance is incredible. I love watching Matt Chapman, and he throws like 96 miles an hour. Ugh, love him.
Have you seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Frank?
No. I'm just going to sit here and nod my head. And I was solely banking on you seeing that.
I actually haven't either. That's one of the holes in my movie knowledge. It's just,
I've only seen them 3 times in the last year.
I haven't been able to bring myself to commit the time. The 10 hours of time it'll take.
They really are that good. And like, I'm not going to say you should spend 12 hours watching the extended editions, but they're worth it.
All right, 3 more going between picks 190 and 200. Josh Donaldson at 194.3. Eduardo Escobar, 198.5. Luis Arias at pick 199, who has I believe, triple eligibility, second, third, and shortstop this upcoming season. Obviously, Kris and I like him as a breakout quite a bit. And I think Donaldson and Eduardo Escobar, perfectly fine high floor corner infielders if you need a little bit of pop at this point in the draft. A massive drop 50 picks later in ADP. Josh Young at pick 253.7, Kevin Biggio at pick 266, Jeimer Candelario at pick 279.8. Scott, Kevin Biggio is a name that we haven't mentioned all offseason, and probably for good reason. I really don't know.
He doesn't bear mentioning.
Right. You might be right. Is that it?
No. Yeah, he's just he seemed like an obvious candidate to be crushed by the new ball, and he was.
Yeah.
I don't expect him to have a job for long, frankly.
Yeah, that's also a part of it, right? Like that Jordan Groshans is coming soon for the Toronto Blue Jays, and the ADP last year for Biggio was inside of the top 70 picks, and now he's going at pick 266. But even with that, it's
even before Groshans comes up, Kevin Smith could replace him for the Blue Jays.
I compared him to Scott Kingery the last couple of seasons, and yikes.
Yikes, indeed. 3 more going between picks 280 and 300. Alec Boehm at 286, Gio Urshela at 290, Patrick Wisdom at pick 292.3. Obviously, Kris likes Boehm quite a bit. Gio Urshela, I don't know that he's going to play every day for the Yankees at this point. I mean, he was kind of banged up last year. I think there's probably some potential at this point in the draft. Not overly excited to draft him. Patrick Wisdom, lots of power, lots of strikeouts. So I think a pretty low batting average, but
high variance player that's probably worth investing in at his price, because if he's able to keep the job, 40 home runs is in play, I think, for him, and that would obviously do a lot of good. He might hit 210, but you'll take it if the cost is next to nothing.
300 plus ADP, Jonathan VR, 309.8, Abraham Toro Hernandez, 318.7, Mike Moustakas, 343.3, Hunter Dozier at 346, Jose Miranda, prospect for the Twins, 365.7, and Evan Longoria at 371.5. Kris, the one thing I'll point out from this group, Evan Longoria, if you're just looking for that long shot to be this year's Joey Votto, I think Longoria could be that guy. As long as he stays on the field, the StatCast data has been amazing.
Yeah, before I went with Alec Boehm, Longoria was my sleeper pick. The StatCast data going back to the start of 2020 season really has been really, really good. He was actually quite useful for stretches last season. So, yeah, I think Evan Longoria is a nice player to have around.
All right, prospects.
Could be Justin Turner-esque.
Prospects to know this upcoming season. Obviously, we talked about Josh Young and Jose Miranda quite a bit. Scott, Miguel Vargas with the Dodgers, Brett Beatty with the Mets, Mark Vientos with the Mets, and Curtis, I'm going to go with Mead. Curtis Mead of the Tampa Bay Rays. I hope, that's got to be how you pronounce it, of course. Scott, anyone stand out on this list for you?
I mean, they're good prospects. I wouldn't be surprised if any of them spent more than half a season in the majors. I wouldn't be surprised if none of them appeared in the majors at all. I think Vientos of the Mets, he's already been to AAA, and he performed at like a 50 homer pace last year if you projected it out over 160 games. So it's pretty exciting. But they may never have a real need for him. Vargas is kind of why
it's the Mets.
Miguel Vargas is, depending on how he progresses this year in the minors, I could see the Dodgers kind of pushing Justin Turner aside finally, because he's of the prospects you just mentioned, he's the most exciting in terms of upside. So keep an eye on him.
Don't say that, Scott. I mean, if Justin Turner gets pushed to the side, at least 2 of my teams that I've already drafted are dead. So I hope that doesn't happen, but it's possible. It is possible with somebody as old as Justin Turner. We're going to wrap there for Scotty and Kris. I hope you're enjoying these position previews, because you're getting a lot of them. You're getting a lot of content here. I am Frank Stampfl. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.